government's job is to provide safe and reliable drinking water. And we serve about 100,000 people in Santa Cruz County, in the city of Santa Cruz and in some areas adjacent to Santa Cruz in the unincorporated area, part of the city of Capitola. We have to our east is the Socal Creek Water District that Don has been involved with for many years. And then to the north, we have other districts such as Scotts Valley that I know Dave was involved in for many years as our regional, partners and also other providers. So we are one of the major public health sort of organizations in any community, but in our community, and particularly in the last several years when the pandemic was going on, I think we all really began to understand even more so than ever how important it is to have safe and reliable drinking water as part of public health protection. We have about 110 employees, 114 employees. We do a lot of things that range across the science and engineering. We have chemists who work for us, microbiologists. We have limnology folks and specialized that we work in that. We're doing a lot of work in climate change and have a lot of capability of understanding and forecasting what kinds of things we are likely to be facing coming climate change, particularly as it relates to more significant kind of rain events, the wetter wet and the drier dries. So we are, and we're heavily regulated. We're regulated both at the state level and at the federal level by regulations that come out of the 1974 Safe Drinking Water Act that's been amended in 1986 and 1996, and also with State Division of Drinking Water, which is part of the State Water Resources Control Board organization. We also have water rights, which are on surface water here in Santa Cruz County, which are really, really important. So we could like to ask this sort of question, and if we were in person, I could ask you all to, tell me which ones you think where do we get our water from in these local sources? Do we use surface water sources, groundwater? We get water from the Sierra Nevada mountains. We hear an awful lot here everywhere in the state really about the snowpack in the Sierra Nevada mountains. And it's really interesting. And of course, from the big picture perspective, very concerning, but it has nothing to do with us because all of our sources are local. We have diverse sources from the point of view of they come from different resources. We have Loch Lomond Reservoir that was created in the 1960s. We have some groundwater in the Belts Wellfield and the Live Oak area. A lot of our resources come from flowing sources, the North Coast streams and the San Lorenzo River. And the Loch Lomond Reservoir is really the source that we added in the 60s to help us get through those dry periods of time. We have a Mediterranean climate here, and that situation makes it so that we basically find ourselves with a wet season, what used to be kind of November to March kind of time frame, and then a dry season. And one of the things that's happening with climate change is we're really seeing a shift in what that wet, dry season time frame looks like. Often now, most of our rain, as was the case this year, comes in a relatively condensed period of time, and that's good and that's bad, and we'll talk more about that as we get through this. So one of the things I wanted to talk about today is why is our water so expensive? And if you pay your water bill or your Santa Cruz, if you pay your Santa Cruz municipal utilities bill, it has three services on it. You get water, you get wastewater, and you get refuse, or now recycling, green waste, pretty soon organic, food waste kind of thing, along with trash. And fundamentally, our water is so expensive because it costs to collect, treat it, and distribute it and maintain the infrastructure. The Santa Cruz water system has a replacement value of about $1 billion. It's an expensive piece of infrastructure for a community, any community. And the age of the system is really requiring us to put major resources into the backbone of the system, which is the source water collection system, the transmission mains that bring the water from the resources, the storage for the Loch Lomond Reservoir and the dam there that we have, and then the water treatment. So we're going to talk more about those things as we go through this a little bit. And this number right here, I see that my assistant who did this didn't update this. It's less than 3/10 of 1 cent per gallon of water. And we're going to talk about that in a second too. This is our infrastructure inventory. We have an earth-built dam that was built in 1960. This is called it's characterized as a high hazard dam, not because of any identified hazard that, from lack of maintenance, as in what happened at Oroville, a number of years ago in 2017, but because it's 235 feet tall. And that height alone and the amount of water that impounds behind it, about 2.8 billion gallons, classifies it as a high hazard. It's regulated under the State Division of Safety of Dam. We have 35 miles of large diameter raw water transmission lines that bring water from the North Coast sources and also bring water from Loch Lomond Reservoir to our Graham Hill Water Treatment Plant. We have a large and complicated surface water treatment plant on Graham Hill, hundreds of small and medium valves in the system. You can see 26,000 water meters, which we're in the process of replacing now, 3,000 fire hydrants, 300 miles of distribution main, the water that brings the system that brings water and fire service to your home, numerous pump stations. The whole west side is a pump system. So we start at the sort of lower in the system, pump up once, 2, 3, up to 4 times up to bring water to the top of the hill there in the west side. And then 18 million gallons of distribution storage in 8 tanks that are spread around the system, including on the west side. This is the map that shows the projects we have underway right now to deal with our, it's called the Santa Cruz Water Program. It's a major reinvestment in the water system. The things that are here in red are a whole series of things related to what I call the backbone infrastructure, the raw water collection and storage system. We have pipeline projects here in yellow, water supply augmentation. We're going to talk more about that down the road. We have major work going on at the Graham Hill Water Treatment Plant now, as well as at Loch Lomond Dam. Construction projects in construction right now, more planned. Meter replacement that's going on right now, system-wide. That's going to be completed within the next year or so. And then a number of treated water storage tanks that are developed. And sort of transitioning from that, this is a really beautiful photo of Loch Lomond Reservoir, which is, as I said, created by the Newell Creek Dam that was built in the early 60s. And we do have a project underway at Newell Creek Dam right now to create a brand new intake structure in that facility. And that intake structure involves a 1,500-foot long tunnel that's been 14-foot diameter tunnel that's been drilled around and under the reservoir to create an opportunity for new intake structure in the reservoir. The current intake is on the front side of this. I'm assuming you all can see my pointer where I'm pointing to. It's on the front side of the dam here, the dam face into the reservoir. And it's connected, these intake structures are connected to a pipeline that goes through the reservoir that was installed when the reservoir was built. That pipeline condition is not good. It was not something that could be rehabilitated. So you can't drill another hole through an earth-filled structure like this one. So the strategy that is being used all around the state for dams of this era is to create a new intake and a new structure for, I'm sorry, let me go back, for the reservoir by drilling around one of the abutments of the dam. That 1,500-foot diameter, or the long project, the tunnel has just been completed. It's now empty, and we are getting ready to put the brand new pipelines in it. this work that you're seeing here is part of a dredging process. This yellow line that you see here is a silt curtain that goes from the top of the reservoir surface all the way to the bottom. That was creating an opportunity for us to, keep the silt that was being created by this dredging process away from the major reservoir water, so that we would be able to take water even when this project was under construction. It's a really impressive piece of work involving people diving and building the new intake structure sort of simultaneously with the tunneling. And at the end of the day, it's kind of like a three-dimensional game of chess. The tunneling and the new intake structures had to connect under the reservoir surface in a way that would allow us to connect the new intakes. Can't be off, too much one way or another, or high or low. So really a very impressive piece of work to get those two things connected. And that's recent, that work has recently been completed. So a big sigh of relief on this project. This project has a price tag, total price tag of about $103 million. And it is the construction phase alone is about 70 million. Lots of work in permitting and design and other kinds of, environmental review had to be completed on this project before it could go forward. So this project is also funded in a very advantageous way through a 100% loan from the State Water Resources Control Board, state revolving loan funds. And the interest rate on that loan over 30 years is 1.4%. So that's a really, really very favorable. I want to talk next about another construction project that's underway. This is a 1960s era view of the Graham Hill Water Treatment Plant. The area over here above the building these are sedimentation basins, where this is a conventional water treatment plant. The water comes up the hill from the Tate diversion right at Crossing Street, what used to be Crossing Street on the River Street side of it. We have a coast pump station there. And it goes into this sort of flocculation sedimentation basins. And once the big particles have been settled out, then it goes through a set of filters that are over here onto the right side of this building. You can see these three tanks. These are concrete tanks that were built when the original building was built. One for sludge, one for recycle, and one for finished water. And then this is a backwash tank that helps to backwash the filters, which is part of the treatment process. And these three tanks down here are being replaced at this time. And I'm going to show you a picture here next of what that looks like. These tanks were, they're concrete. They had cracks in them, and they were not they did not meet the current seismic standards. So the plan was to replace them and to do so in a fashion that would also help us to reduce the amount of chlorine we're using as we do the water treatment through this phase of the process. So these three tanks are being replaced now. This is kind of a brand new sort of tank that's in a space that's been built behind a 40-foot nail wall that's been created. The hill space was cut back there. A new wall was created. This is one tank. This is a second tank going in, where this one, the old one, for this sludge tank, was taken out, so that now we're using this. This all has to happen while the treatment plant continues to operate, right? So you can just imagine, it's like riding your bicycle while you're changing the tires and fixing the chain and adjusting the brakes. It's a major phased process. And this project is, as I say, it's underway. This is a picture that was taken like last week. So you can see that this is the forms that are being created for the concrete pours that will happen. And once this tank is done, then they'll be able to take one of the other two existing old tanks out, and we'll have a ability to phase the work on a stepwise going forward. This project has a $49 million loan from the State Revolving Loan Fund, also at 1.4%. And I think it's this kind of expensive work that's going on right now is really helping us, and being able to get this low cost financing is really helping us to mitigate the rate impacts over time. And then I think finally I want to say, there we go. So here's a little quiz. You know, what does a bottle of water, bottled water, what is tap water, bottled water, and brewed coffee from your local coffee shop for a 12-ounce serving, what does that cost? And for a, there we go. So for bottled water, it's about 37 cents for a bottle, but you have to buy 8. For coffee at Pete's or Starbucks, you know, a 12-ounce cup of just fresh brewed coffee, not anything fancy, you know, $2.75. And for a glass of water from your tap, your kitchen tap, about 0.2 cents. So it's really, it is expensive. This cost does represent, you know, an investments of big money into the water system. It's going to get more expensive over time, but it's still a bargain. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is why don't we have water restrictions? There's a big drought going on and there's lots of conversation going on. Just pick up your newspaper or, you know, look online, and every day you'll be seeing all the things about California drought. I saw something this morning about the governor wants to give additional $2 billion in funding for water conservation, which is, you know, in a lot of places makes a lot of sense. So what I want to say about this topic is Santa Cruz is unique in the sense we're not connected to any of the state water projects. We don't have, as I said, Sierra snowpack doesn't matter to us. What matters to us is what happens here locally in terms of how much precip we get. And Loch Lomond is currently more than 90% full. We are still on our flowing sources. We have enough water in our flowing sources to meet daily demands from those flowing sources, and we will continue to use those flowing sources as long as we can and still meet fish flow requirements, which we've committed to voluntarily. And then we'll switch over to our stored water. The situation in Santa Cruz is also unique because Loch Lomond, as our local storage, is a relatively small reservoir, and typically we get into trouble sooner than elsewhere in the state. It happened in 2014 and it happened last year in 2021 here. People were starting to get concerned about the level of the drought, but in both 2014 at the state level, the hysteria didn't really happen until 2015. And the same is occurring here. But actually for us, our bad year was last year. And even though we got less rain than we anticipated or we would hope for, and I'm going to show you a slide of that in a minute, that this year, we actually, those storms that occurred in the last part of December really gave us the capability of refilling Loch Lomond. And when Loch Lomond is full or near full, we're fine. So we are, and that sort of connected up with the fact that our customer demand is very, very efficient. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that also. And there are, we did an updated water shortage contingency plan last year. It's pretty onerous. We go to rationing at stage 1 because our customer demand and supply situation is so sort of critically hardened, if you will. And so there's no point in us putting on restrictions when our situation is such that it doesn't require for it. Our local situation doesn't require it. This is our this is the situation with respect to stream flows and I'm sorry, is this is actually precip, I think. So you can see that we had a pretty good situation in October, very unusual. The blue is the long-term average. The red is this year. This 1977 is our worst year on record. You can also see that November was kind of wet and then dry and then really wet compared to normal in December, and then very, very dry over the last several months. And this pattern is what we're beginning to see, this kind of getting, most of our precip in a single year or a single month, often in a single storm. And this is a really challenging situation for us to deal with because the Loch Lomond was designed for annual depletion and replenishment.
On my Sony XPR right here. So my tablet. Now this is the first time I'm this is an iPhone 8, by the way, to this Sony TV, and I get a 4-digit code.
Carol,
right
I think you need to mute your device, please.
8.
There, I got it.
Thank you. So our system was designed for annual depletion during this dry period in the summer, and then refill based on getting sort of more normal precip over, the November to April timeframe. And that is what's really changing that cycle. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. How we make decisions every year about what to do with whether to put restriction in place is a projection having to do with where do we start with storage in Loch Lomond and where do we project we're going to end. And so what we do is we take into account demand and stream flow and storage levels at the beginning and how much water we're going to need to release for fish. And we make a projection using a model that has been developed and kind of tested over time. And that model was run at the beginning of late in March, so a few weeks ago, before we've had these most recent rains, that projected that we're starting at about 90% full, and even without doing any curtailment, people's normal demand behaviors over the coming summer, we would end at about 70%. Now, this is where we were about this time last year. Around 74% was where we were at on Loch Lomond last year at this time, and we ended up at about 54%. And had we not had those that really replenishing rainfall at the end of December, we'd be in a more serious situation because Loch Lomond doesn't do well in back-to-back really dry situations, and that's one of the things that we're really concerned about. I wanted to show you this graphic, which shows this is gross, the darker blue line is the gross per capita water use that takes the total water demand and spreads it over every use in our system. And then the lighter blue is residential per capita water use. This is indoor and outdoor water use. And you can see that when we rationed water in 2014, we got a pretty good sized bump down from what had been kind of the 60 gallons per person per day that had been 2011, 12, 13 to about 48. And then because of the backdrop of the how bad the situation was in the state in 2015, there was another bump down. We were rationing water in both of those 2 years. And then we had an all clear here starting in 2016. 2017 was the wettest year on record for us. 2018 was dry, sort of in the way that 2020 was. 2019 was a wet year. 2020, I mentioned, was dry. And you can see that what happened is our customers adopted a set of behaviors during the drought in 2014, and they've maintained those behaviors in terms of water use efficiency. This is indoor water use and outdoor water use. Some of you may have seen the article in the paper a couple of days ago about Representative, I think Senator Hertzberg, proposing a more aggressive standard for indoor water use, reduction in the assumption that we're going to go to 50 gallons per person per day by 2030, and wants to make that to, I think, 45 for indoor only. And usually there's around a 10 gallon per person per day allocation for outdoor. This number that we have is already indoor and outdoor. So I'll talk a little bit more about this when I talk about demand forecasts in a second. So fundamentally, our local situation with respect to supply and demand does not warrant us taking action to further curtail water use, customer water use this summer, which is why we did not recommend that to our council members when we talked with them about this on April 12th. The next topic I want to talk about is why is the city allowing growth when we have water shortages? And I guess what I want to say about this is, if you were having a Thanksgiving dinner where, you were going to have 20 more people come to your house, you'd make a plan, right? And really for us, we plan for growth in exactly the same way. We are required by the state to take the population projections that come from the state and that are filtered down through the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments and allocated out to the jurisdictions. Water utilities of our size and complexity are required by the state to take those numbers and make a plan that allows us to meet the demand coming from those additional populations. We do recognize a lot of the growth that's coming is coming in the form of multifamilies, which are significantly more efficient than single family residential customers.
Okay, now I'm off.
Okay. And we're using the same amount of water as we were in the 1960s, despite growth. I'm going to show you a graph about that. And I will say to you, and I think I can sort of demonstrate to you, that we need new supply regardless of growth. We don't have, it has to do with the sizing and of Loch Lomond and our inability to get through multiple years of drought because the storage that we have is too small. So this basically is the mechanism that we use to develop demand forecasts. We take the population forecast, we use a database assumption about the number of people per household, and we project the number of housing units we're going to be serving. We take that and we times it by the annual number of units in hundreds of cubic feet of water, which is 748 gallons per CCF, combined per household, consumed per household, which gives us a total residential demand for each forecast year. And then we take the total residential demand plus the data-driven assumptions about non-residential demand. We've included UCSC's demand in from the associated LRDP in our forecast, and we look at water system demand for each forecast year. This is the result of our forecast. It goes out to 2045. There are backup tables in the document that we have on this. This is reflected in our most recent urban water management plan, but it takes the information from 2015, 2020, and then it does the forecast. And you can see down here at this line that's rounded with the, includes some projections for losses, that we go from about 2.6 billion gallons a year to about 2.8 billion gallons a year in this 25-year period. And that generally compared to what we did in 2015, because of the way that our customers have maintained that really efficient water use, we're about 20 to 25% below what we projected even in 2015. And you can see here that basically what's happened is due to efficiencies and different kinds of development, that what we have going on is we've got a larger population and a substantially lower amount of demand. 2000 had about 4.4 billion gallons a year. We're at about 2.6 billion gallons a year. This is a substantially lower amount of water use for a substantially larger, what's that, almost a doubling of the population. Now, this can't keep going because we've, sort of created a lot of individual efficiencies already. But as I mentioned, a lot of the new development is in the more efficient multifamily format. It's also being influenced by the very conserving building and plumbing code changes that have gone into place, and a series of changes that have occurred since 1992, when the first set of plumbing code changes to encourage water conserving fixtures occurred. So I think, and I just to show you, I'm sorry, I'm going to show you the next slide, and then I think I've got a little video. So this shows between 2002 to 2004 and 2016, 2018, what the changes in the various customer classes that we're talking about have been with respect to water use. You can see in the single family category that we're using about 40% less. There has been some additional single family development in that time period, but Santa Cruz is a pretty built out community. So single family, even 80 with ADUs involved, is not a huge, big growing portion of our total demand. You can see that multifamily is, more than 30% down, businesses more than 27% down. UCSC in 2002, 2004 was projecting that its demand by 2020 would go to 349 million gallons from about 160 million gallons. And its current demand in that period is about 169 million gallons. They pretty much added that additional 10,000 students to their use without increasing their water use at all. And I think that although they probably can't do that under the LRDP, a lot of that is driven not so much by, really, really significantly increasing water use on a per capita basis, but it's by bringing housing to the campus, which from my point of view anyway, the housing would be a benefit to have more housing on campus. And if we need to provide the water for it, we can definitely do that. You can see that irrigation, both in general and in golf courses, has gone down. We do have a small amount of water that's been used historically, untreated water that's used in the coast irrigation. Sometimes if you drive up the coast, you'll see, Brussels sprouts or artichokes being irrigated, and oftentimes that's water that comes from our system, although those users also have a lot of local sources that they're using. So this is a sort of a changing complexion of water consumption here, and a lot of this has bought us some sort of breathing room with respect to our water supply challenges, but more conservation alone cannot solve the problem we have, and we're going to talk more about that in a minute. Okay, so this is supposed to work, and it didn't work. Hold on a second. There we go. I don't know why they put this on the video that has me with my mouth open like that. It's like, I got to get them to fix that. It's like, really?
Anyone who's lived in Santa Cruz or anywhere in California for any length of time knows about droughts and wildfire. And we've come to understand that many of these events are made worse by climate change. It's fairly easy to understand how droughts and wildfire relate to climate change. Less rain means drier conditions, and drier conditions drive devastating wildfires, a situation that seems to get worse each year. It's also easy to see how drought and wildfire impact water supply in a place like Santa Cruz, where we rely completely on local rainfall for all of our drinking water supply. But there's another problem with climate change that seriously impacts our water system: too much rain. Our system was designed for the more normal weather patterns and rainfall events of the last century. It wasn't designed for the more extreme weather events that we're experiencing as a result of climate change. Our system is unable to treat the muddy, debris-filled water that comes with extreme rain events. Extreme rainfall also causes flooding and landslides, which break old and fragile pipelines. Our new reality is that we no longer have normal weather patterns in Santa Cruz. Extreme weather is our new normal. And our system was simply not designed for the new normal weather patterns that we're experiencing today. Climate change presents significant challenges for our system. The good news is we know what to do to ensure that whenever you turn on your faucet in the years ahead, high-quality water will be available to you. And the work is underway. We're replacing the oldest critical pipelines that are most vulnerable to cracks and breaks. We're replacing the pipelines, intake structures, and valves at Loch Lomond Reservoir, where we store the vast majority of our water, to ensure that we'll be able to fill and release water as efficiently as possible. We're replacing outdated equipment at the Graham Hill Water Treatment Plant to meet modern standards. We're testing new ways to store water, such as using underground space in depleted aquifers, which both increases our supply and replenishes the groundwater basin. We're revising the city's century-old water rights so that we have more flexibility in how we use and store water. And we're replacing broken and inefficient water meters with conservation-friendly meters that allow customers to monitor their water use. When it comes to planning for water supply to adapt to climate change, Santa Cruz is ahead of other communities. That makes sense because we have a long history of using water wisely, and we have some of the lowest water use in the state. At the City of Santa Cruz Water Department, we're making wise decisions and smart investments now to ensure the safety and reliability of our drinking water for decades to come. Please join us in these efforts by following the Water Department on social media, exploring our website, and engaging with us at our public meetings. Thank you.
Okay, that worked. Amazing. I don't know how many of you might have had a chance to sort of poke around on this website. It's the Center for Western Weather and Water Extremes. I call it the Center for Western Wacky Weather. But they have some great stuff, and including some most recent stuff looking at up-to-date stuff looking at this year in atmospheric rivers. But atmospheric rivers have become a major influencer of our what's going on with our supply in various years. This is from 2017. You can see that there were, I don't know, 40 some, 48, I think there were. I can't see the top, 45. You can see that the how many of these events really pushed a lot of water into onto the West Coast, and a lot of those photos I showed you in that video that just ran were from that year. And we had some very, very significant problems that year in our water system. The reliability of the infrastructure part of our system was really sort of brought home to roost, the unreliability, I guess I should say, as a result of what we saw this year. And it drove to a significant degree the amount of the way that we're approaching the water system reinvestments that are going on in our system. So this is the year that we presented information about the chickens coming home to roost with respect to infrastructure vulnerability and lack of reliability. So starting in January, we had 5 major pipeline breaks between January, beginning of January and the end of February that year on the Newell Creek pipeline, which is our backup supply to bring water from Loch Lomond Reservoir, which doesn't have the turbidity impacts that the river has when we get storm events, and brings us water into the system. And this is an example just from this week about ongoing drought. So extreme weathers, you know, one year we had on February 7th of 2020, 2017, we had, this is our major diversion structure that pumps water out of the river up to our Graham Hill Water Treatment Plant. This is one of our most secure sources from the coast source. This is a karst source that really is, you know, it's like the little engine that could. We had some breaks with the pipes there, a number of additional failures on the system. And, you know, more problems with midnight, you know, sort of fixing the leaks and trying to make sure that we had water every single day, which was no small deal in that particular year. I think I'm kind of winding down here with a couple of things about supply increments and where are we, you know, going to get water supply and when are we going to get it. So I want to start with talking briefly about the Water Supply Advisory Committee process that occurred in 2014, 2015, and then the work that's been directed by that Water Supply Advisory Committee process from 2015 until present, and then upgrades to the system infrastructure to support augmentation. In 2014, the council appointed 14 members of the community to advise the city and on what to do about water supply augmentation. And they had a charge, which was to define the problem, evaluate available alternatives, and make recommendations. That was their charge. They worked over a year and a half to do this work, and these meetings were at least a couple of 8 to 12 hours per month for monthly meetings during that period of time. They did a lot of really great work. Their definition of the problem statement is that the fundamental problem that we have is we have limited storage, will not allow us to, supply water reliably year in and year out when we have really, really dry years back to back. We have a commitment to fish flow requirements to sort of share our resources with the endangered coho salmon and the threatened steelhead trout here in our basins and in the North Coast basins. And we also need to prepare for potential climate change impacts, which we've been doing. We have a peak season gap under the analysis that they did at that time of about 1.2 billion gallons. And that was on a 3.2 billion gallon projection of demand, which obviously having lower demand has made that gap smaller, but has not made it go away. And water conservation alone is not enough. So this is their problem statement, and I think they did a very good job of really understanding what the issues were and articulating them in a simple and accessible way so people could understand what is the problem we're trying to solve here. We did a lot of work to welcome and ask anyone who had an idea about how we should solve this problem. We did a kind of a science fair focused activity. It was called the Water Supply Convention. This happened in October of 2014. And we had over 100 proposals that people brought in and said, you should solve the problem this way. Some of you will recall that the way we got to this place was that there was a lot of pushback against the desalination project that had been under development here. And people felt that there was a better way, a less expensive way, a more Santa Cruz-esque kind of way. And so this was one of the ways for us to bring the community out and ask, okay, what do you think the answer to the problem is? Every proposal that was here was given some kind of review, and we ended up with a fairly long list of about 40, I think, projects that were given a somewhat detailed review, given that a lot of them were very, conceptual level, but were allowed us to really look at a lot of different things through the Water Supply Advisory Committee process and come up with recommendations that included these: maximize conservation, which we have done, and more is based on what we've seen in terms of what's going on with per capita use. Share excess winter water when available with other districts. So there's been a pilot project with the Socal Creek Water District that has allowed us to share water with them and have them rest their wells. We've tried that a couple of years. Unfortunately, over the last number of years, we've had a lot of dry years that have not allowed us we haven't had the water to provide. Store excess water in depleted aquifers, both in the Mid-County Basin and in the Santa Margarita Basin, which is up near Felton, and up in that area of the county. We are looking actively at storing water in those basins. There is pilot work going on in the Mid-County Basin, which is sort of between the port and La Selva Beach. And we're working right now on a aquifer storage and recovery project. We put about 100 million gallons of water in the ground there this winter, and are looking at taking that out and bringing that back into the system this summer as part of supply augmentation. And then the other options are utilize the purified recycled water, which is one of the things that the Socal Creek Water District is working on, and we've been actively following what they're doing and engaging with them. So there's probably going to be some more work on this one coming up. And then utilize desalinated water. this was the sort of set of options that the Water Supply Advisory Committee members asked us to evaluate on a kind of a side-by-side basis, and that work has been going on over the last several years. So you can see that these are sort of, I talked a little bit about fish flows. This is an actual Belts well field project where we're looking at, we've retrofit an existing well to allow for injection as well as extraction of water. And this is a pilot work that's going on there to test that out. This is work looking at how do we, make the supply reliability at the dam better by not having infrastructure up there that is not reliable. And all this is kind of the work that's been going on over the last number of years. But we're ready to turn the corner. So we're ready to move ahead this year with a sort of a decision-making to bring to the council for some recommendations, hoping to bring those recommendations at the end of November to the council. We'll be having a series of discussions with the Santa Cruz Water Commission, which meets on the typically on the first Monday of every month at 7 p.m. Those meetings are all, hybrid meetings, so you can tune in. And we're talking about, we've conducted a vulnerability analysis that's looking about how the availability of surface water will change as a result of climate change. Aquifer storage and recovery is a great opportunity for us, but you have to have excess winter water in order to do it. And if you have year after year after year of not having a very reliable supply of excess winter water, it's not going to be a very viable alternative for us in the long run. We have a whole series of evaluation criteria that we're looking at that we're going to be ranking and rating, if you will, a whole series of projects with that'll start in June and will happen again in August, September, July, August, September. Both those July and September have the first meetings are on 4th of July and Labor Day, so they have to get rescheduled, but that will be available on our website. And then we are doing some work associated with a draft policy and resolution for the council in October. That will have recommendations in it for water supply augmentation and a direction to pursue a sort of a roadmap project, which is called a Water Supply Augmentation Implementation Plan. That will, if there's CEQA necessary, the California Environmental Quality Act analysis will occur on that product. And then we're hoping to have a council action on this sort of at their second meeting in November. And I think with that, we're at questions.
Well, thank you very much, Rosemary. That was really informative. Quite excellent. All right, so questions for Rosemary. I know that in this group, there are lots of questions out there. So who's going to go first? And all right. Nancy Freeman. Nancy Abrams.
Hi, thank you so much, Rosemary. That was really wonderful. I actually have 4 questions, and so let me just start with 2, and if we have more time at the end, I'll come back with the other 2. The first one is a little bit personal. So our house desperately needs to be repainted, and in order to do that, we have to power wash it. And I'm just wondering if there are any restrictions on power washing.
Nope.
Okay.
Power wash ahead.
Great, thank you. Now, the other thing is all summer, when we are never getting any rain, we are totally drenched in fog. And why are we not putting any effort into collecting water from fog, which has, several methods have been developed. I did some research into this a while back. And we are one of the few places that could really collect water every single night.
Yeah, okay, so I think we've heard this one a couple of times. There are a number of things that are developed that are looking at ways to pull water out of the air, sort of dehumidifiers, if you will. They're not at a scale that really makes a difference. And one of the things I've seen recently is that the climate change projections indicate that they are, that fog is going to be impacted in the future as well. So I think that, you know, the fog idea is we are getting benefit from that in terms of just the way that you know, your individual yard or the plants and what have you are benefiting from it, but there really isn't enough water to develop on a scale that would make a difference. When you're talking about 1.2 billion gallons of water, or even 800 million, it's a lot of water, and it has to be producible reliably, and it's not commercially scalable to a scale that gives us that.
Well, you know, solar energy isn't either, but people do it individually on their houses. Isn't there any way we can do
I mean, you know, if you have a way, or if you're interested in trying that, maybe decentralized version of that is great, but it's not a solution that you can scale on a you know, for a system that's serving 100,000 people.
Okay. Do we have time for me to ask a couple more about?
Well, let's see.
Okay.
Maybe I'm going to cycle back to you, Nancy. Okay, I see a couple of people unmuted yourself. Questions from, was it Ron? Ray.
Okay, thank you. Rosemary, thank you for a very enlightening presentation for me. I'm sure happy you have the job you have. My question has more to do with, why are you so interested in this? How did you become interested in doing this as your work?
Yeah, you know, I started working in a water utility in 1981 in Seattle, and my first job was, I'm not an engineer. My first job was water conservation, and of course Seattle is a, you know, very rainy place, but has a lot of similar kinds of values and community values as here. So there was a strong, you know, willingness and interest in improving water use efficiency. I went from that job to the environmental and sort of regional planning manager for Seattle Water Department, and did a lot of work in, you know, thinking about this. At the time that I was doing this work, the big effort was in energy, you know, conservation, right? It was sort of like that was the big focus. And I think that I sort of looked around, but I really actually had a great career. This has been, I tell people that if this business, the water utility business, wasn't in a place at the time that I started that was going to evolve and change, that I would have never had a job, because, you know, it's a very structured, you know, engineering, finance kind of based thing. But when you're starting to talk about things where we have to integrate climate and, you know, cost and affordability and values and new regulations, there's a lot of challenges here that are great for somebody with sort of my skill sets and interests. And so the result for me has been just a really fabulous career with an opportunity to really make a difference in communities that I've worked in. And I've done a lot of work in the sort of multi-party negotiations as part of what I've done before I came here. So when the Water Supply Advisory Committee process started, I was like, well, I know how to do this. I just work with these people. And, you know, I laugh because I was invited to be part of their, sit at the table with them as an ex officio member, which meant I didn't have a vote. And okay, that's all good. I was brand new here. And by the time we got toward the end, there was one thing that I could not live with that they wanted, and I vetoed it, and they let me. There you go.
Okay. I had a question. You have 100,000 users. There's only 55,000 people in the city. So are a lot of them outside of the city? And then how does the politics work? Because as I understand, policy is decided by the city.
Yeah, so this is one of those places where the challenge is that you oftentimes water utilities like this will grow as a community grows, and you know, there's some boundary and then it sort of grows out to the next boundary. Martine Bernal used to tell me that what was going on at the time that they extended service into Live Oak and part of Capitola was the assumption that they were ultimately going to annex those parts into the city. And then somewhere along the way, there was a decision to kind of put a big green belt around the city and to stop annexing. And when that happened, we had these customers, and pretty much people don't really have an alternative once you're being served by a water utility. The idea of saying go away and we're gonna buy our part of the system out from you, it's like that part doesn't really work very well. So we have about a third of our total customers in outside the city limits, and so we're about I think about 65,000 inside the city limit. That number is a little bit higher than the number you had, and then about 35,000 outside the city limits is about what it is.
Okay. Other questions?
Oh, and you asked about the politics. So it is all the city council. There've been historical sort of tensions about that, but somewhere in the 90s, they included a member on the Water Commission, which is a long-standing city-appointed advisory committee. It advises the council that put a sort of outside the city rep on it. The current person is Tom Burns, who used to be the land use manager for the county. And that's the way it's done. And at the moment, all seems to be happy, but one never knows when these things will turn unhappy.
Okay. All right, Nancy, we can go back to your number 3.
Oh, thank you so much. So, so Rosemary, I'm kind of mystified how we get water from the San Lorenzo River, which every time I drive over it is completely empty.
Yeah, well, empty is a relative term, but we have a diversion structure slightly upstream of the Highway 1 bridge, and the amount of water that we take every day is modest there, but we have a water right for what's called 12.2 CFS, which is a lot more water than we're actually using. So we pull the water out of the system there. It combines with water coming in from the coast sources to the extent that we have water available from those sources, and it's pumped up to through the coast pump station to the Graham Hill Water Treatment Plant and is treated there. So what you're seeing on most of the bridges that you're driving over is below where we've taken whatever water we're taking out. So you're probably not getting the full picture of what's available.
What percent of the river are we taking from the San Lorenzo and from the upstream sources? Is it 5% or 50%?
The flow in the river really varies month to month, right? Obviously, right? And so I'm trying to think. In most of the year, it's a few percent. It's not, there's 40 or 50 CFS, and we're taking, 5, 6, 7%, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And our demand is currently around 6 or 7 million gallons a day. But 1 million of that right now is going over into this aquifer storage and recovery, so it's relatively modest.
Other questions here?
I'd like to ask a
question.
I'd like to ask a question, Rosemary.
Yes, go ahead.
When you talk about diverting water into the aquifers, I'm assuming you don't want what you might call dirty water from the river to go down in the aquifer.
Oh,
so
no.
What do you do? And the corollary to that is, I'm not a golfer, but I visited Pasatiempo recently, and I saw that they had put in wells.
Yeah.
So what happens when I imagine a golf course uses more than a little water? Are they depleting our aquifer? And how does one balance out responsibility for something like that?
Right.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So to put water in the ground, in the form that we're talking about, it has to be treated drinking water. The state has, and pretty much every state I've worked in has, what's called an anti-degradation standard that says you can't put stuff in this aquifer that depletes the quality of the natural groundwater. So you have to treat the water to drinking water standards. It's one of the reasons the Mid-County project is really is really attractive because we already serve out that area. We have a groundwater system there. So we have a way to get the water to that area. And once the water's there, we have a way to bring it back out and put it into the system, which makes it, when I quoted some of those numbers to you earlier about how expensive the pieces of the work that we've got underway and planned are, having anything that you can do that uses existing infrastructure is really a big benefit. So that's number one. And number two, let's see, remind me of the second part of your question.
The second part was, what about Pasatiempo? When they take water out of our aquifer, who has responsibility for mitigating that?
Yeah, so number one, Pasatiempo has an agreement with the Scotts Valley City of Scotts Valley for wastewater. They take treated effluent from the wastewater plant that goes in a pipeline right by them that ultimately goes down and connects with the outfall pipeline from the city's wastewater treatment plant, Neary Lagoon. And they treat that on site to a tertiary standard to allow them to irrigate their golf course, most of the golf course except for the greens, right? They did drill a well. I don't know how much that well was producing. When they were drilling it, it got pretty damn deep and it wasn't producing much water. So I don't really know what piece of that is working in that particular situation. There are, since 2014, regulations related to groundwater sustainability, and in both the Mid-County Basin and in the Santa Margarita, which the Pasatiempo area would be part of, there are requirements for groundwater sustainability plans. The Mid-County one was completed in 2020, and the first version of that for the Santa Margarita Basin was just completed earlier this year. So those things look at and establish groundwater levels and sustainability criteria for the operation of all of these groundwater basins. And really, if you're a user, particularly if you're a bigger user, as in the case, for example, the Seascape Golf Course down in the Mid-County Basin, that facility is metered. It's not currently, doesn't have a charge for it, but it could be that what will happen as a result of the Groundwater Sustainability Agency taking action to provide a charge for those people to help pay for the mitigations that are occurring to keep seawater out of that aquifer.
Okay, and right. I see Bill and Constantine and also Mark Levy. You've unmuted yourself. So Bill, why don't you go first?
Regarding the purity of the water, concern for drugs that are flushed down the toilet, and for the minute plastics that are in the water. What's the threat to us?
So the advanced treated recycled water goes through the sort of typical secondary treatment in a wastewater plant. And then in the case of wanting to use it to do groundwater injection, there's a project going on right now that's building a pipeline from the wastewater plant over at California and Laurel's, sort of down there. And then across Laurel Street, it's on Broadway right now. It's going to Frederick. It's going to go up Frederick to Socal, and then out to a brand new purified wastewater treatment plant that's being built at Chanticleer. That plant will include taking that water and treating it to tertiary standards, and then standards that include, I think it's at least 2 phases of membrane treatment, including reverse osmosis, and a number of environmental it's called AOP, which is peroxide and I think UV, which is sort of mixed together. So it's a number of steps that include physical barriers to things passing the membrane, and then disinfection. So those are major processes that are regulated, highly regulated, and that water will then sort of be when it comes out, it's almost too clean. So they put back probably some minerals so that it's, when it goes into the ground in the Mid-County Basin, it's not leaching metals in particular, like arsenic and chromium-6 into the water, because it's doesn't have any of that, and the aquifer's trying to get to equilibrium by moving those molecules around. So it's a pretty advanced, multiple steps, advanced treatment, and they are monitoring those kinds of what are called constituents of emerging concern, pharmaceutical and personal care products, and a lot of that treatment does deal with those particular issues very effectively.
Okay. Constantine? And you're muted.
There. So I've attended a number of discussions about the water, of course, during this time. And one of them was from, I guess, a scientist from UCSC about the use of other sources to create water, one of which was the, when you process water from the ocean, what?
Desal.
Yeah, desal.
Desalination.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Anyway, so how serious, these particular discussions indicated that we will run out of places to put dams, and therefore desalination is a viable option,
Right.
even though they're expensive to maintain, build, and so forth, as it was demonstrated that dams are as well.
Yeah.
So the two are the same. So my question is, how serious is the problem, and is desalination being considered as in the forecast for taking care of this issue?
Yeah. So a couple of things. One is we're not at a place at the moment where I think desal is a solution that we need to sort of pursue. The main reason being that I would describe desal as a not timely solution. I think we need to get what we can get from aquifer storage and recovery, and possibly from recycled water, because those solutions, there's pieces that are in place already that are going to allow us to kind of move those forward. And timeliness, from my point of view, is really important. Desal is a still very kind of not preferred project here in Santa Cruz. We just completed a poll that's going to be briefed to our Water Commission on May 2nd. And unfortunately, desal is still kind of in third place. So not popular, but even if it wasn't, it's a project that has what I would describe as a Christmas tree of opportunities. The ornaments of opportunities on that tree for litigation and permitting challenges and what have you will not allow that project to get done in, 3 to 5 years. It will be 10 to 20 years kind of time frame. And we need a decision. We need help now, not down the road. So it's definitely not off the table. And you're correct that if we don't have places to store water, and there are no more opportunities for new sort of on-stream reservoirs, like Knoll Creek was going to block up a stream and fill up. That's not happening anymore. So if we can't put the water in the ground, or if can't store enough, then we really have two options that don't require storage. One of them is desal, and the other one is what's called direct potable reuse, which in this case would be take the water that's coming out of the new Chanticleer plant, for example, send it through a pipeline and put it into the brand new upgraded water treatment plant at Graham Hill, mix it with whatever else is available there, and then do the treatment process with additional barriers that would be built in there, and put it in the system. Those are the two options locally that do not require any place to store the water. And it's one of the reasons those two are on the table, although I personally don't see them as being the things we're going to try first.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're just about running out of time. So Mark, Folsom has a question. Mark Levy, did you have a question?
Yes, I do.
Okay, go ahead with it. We'll do the 2 marks. I'll get the last questions here.
Thank you. First of all I can say is, wow, do you make me feel good about who's in charge of our water?
Great.
My first question has to do with gray water. I came in at about the Loch Lomond presentation, so I missed the very first part. Perhaps you already addressed this, and if so, I apologize. But how efficiently are we using our gray water, for instance, for golf courses, et cetera? I know De La Viega uses it.
Yeah, so the problem with what might be called the purple pipe solution, the sort of the system, as opposed to what you might do on your piece of property, a system, is that it's pretty darn expensive to put the pipes in to take tertiary treated water from a wastewater treatment facility in Neary Lagoon and send it up to, well, to distribute it to serve irrigation purposes in like parks and what have you. It's like putting a whole new distribution system in your system, which is it's onerously expensive. Let's put it that way. If you were a brand new community and you were building, all the infrastructure, putting in purple pipes then makes total sense because you got the streets open and what have you. Putting it in as a retrofit, especially in our community where there's a relatively small irrigation demand, and that's been looked at fairly carefully. It's very distributed, with a couple of places like De La Viega and Pasatiempo being kind of the exceptions. It's not cost effective. On your individual property, both the rainwater catchment and the gray water recycling, I get a lot of questions about this. And personally, what I would say is, well, rainwater catchment is good as long as you have rain. When you don't have rain, then you sort of maybe are off the system when water is available, and then when water's not available, then you get on the system. Well, that's kind of backwards, right, to what you would really want. And from a gray water perspective, if people want to put their shower water and their washing machine water, et cetera, into their garden, I guess they can, but think about where that water goes. And if you don't do that, it goes into the sewer, which means that source is going to be a reliable source for us to treat and use as a recycled water source. So it's like a zero-sum game, right? If we don't have an adequate source there from the wastewater side and reliable and stable, then we're going to spend a bunch of money on trying to figure out how to develop that source, only it's not going to be there. And that we're going to be in the same kind of situation we might be in with respect to surface water.
Okay. My second question has to do with, I have had conversations with people regarding how the military deals with water supplies when they're in a hostile environment abroad, and that they have these very, very large rubber bladders that they store water in for a base. I've often wondered, why can we not put a big bladder up somewhere, even if floating it in the ocean if necessary, to catch and pump some of the water in that we get from the river? I understood what you said about it being untreatable when it's muddy.
Yeah.
But perhaps as a settling process in a very large rubber bladder, 1, 2, 3, I don't know what their volume is. Is this all pipe dream stuff, or is there some real reality to it?
I think the issue there is scalability. When in the 87 and 92 drought, when I was in Seattle, there was some guy who called me up at one point and said, I want to go to Alaska and I want to fill up these bladders and I want to tow them down here. And it's like, well, that sounds great, but my demand is 20 million gallons a day. And, I need to, if you're going to make a difference, it's got to be bigger. And I think it's a scalability issue. When you're dealing with, a handful, not a handful, maybe even 100 or 200 people, it's a really different situation when you're trying to plan for 100,000.
Okay, Mark.
I have the impression that you're pumping pretty large volumes of water through pretty large elevation changes, which involves a lot of energy. And I was wondering if any of that energy is recovered when you bring the water back down the hill to, you know, mitigate the energy consumption of your system.
Yeah. So we do have some solar, particularly at Bay Street, but you got to think of what happens when the water comes out of a tank, right? It goes into, typically from a tank like the brand new U5 tank that's up on the east side, or U2, the one that you can see when you're driving up Empire Grade. That water goes out of that system and into a distribution system, and then really into a local area. So the answer is we're not recovering the energy from moving water out of U2 tank down to, you know, the households. It's going into 8-inch or typical 8 or 10-inch pipes in the distribution system.
I think Loch Lomond is at 500 and some feet above.
Yeah, and there's been work going on looking at Loch Lomond, and there's work going on with the replacement of the Mill Creek pipeline. And you know, honestly, I can't remember whether they've looked at that or not. But the answer is, you make a good point, and I don't actually know whether in the work that's underway to design that piece, whether they've been looking at energy recovery.
I read someplace a few years ago, I think something like 1/6 of all the electricity used in California is for pumping water.
Well, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised, but I will tell you that in the current work that's going on in climate adaptation or climate action planning that the city's got underway, and if you haven't had Tiffany Wise West talking about climate action planning and climate adaptation planning, you should have her. She's a great speaker, and she's really great. But in the utilities and the municipal use in the Santa Cruz sort of provision of, you know, how power is being used or energy is being used, like 7%, including water and wastewater. So it's not as big as you might think. If you're talking about moving water from, you know, through the Delta and down over the Hatch piece, now you're talking about pumping water, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't really know the magnitude. It just seems that it might be an opportunity.
Yeah. Okay, Irene, I'm going to let you have the last one.
Okay, I think it will be a quick one. I just wondered if we were one of the areas that is testing wastewater for COVID.
Yes, actually, that has been being done. A guy named Ken Babatola, I think, from the wastewater plant has done that. So I know, Barry, you asked me about this question. So that was getting going, obviously, like a couple of years ago now. There was a beginning of that, and Santa Cruz was looking at that.
Yeah, one of our other participants, Cher, was saying that she looked it up and said that the CDC website shows Santa Cruz is reporting. Cher, are you still on today? Yeah. Anyway, so
yeah. Hi, Barry. Yeah, I am.
Okay.
I only discovered the CDC website maybe a month ago, and I was wondering how long we've been reporting. It sounds like much longer than what it looks like on the website. Well,
I think that there was a while, maybe the first 8 or 10 months of all of that work where they weren't absolutely, you know, that they were still messing around with the procedure and trying to get it all lined up. And I think that once it got settled out, and there was a lot of work going on and, you know, comparing different kinds of organizations were doing it differently. And anyway, I think they finally got it standardized. And so maybe that's when they started comparing or putting it on the website.
Okay.
Great. I'm using it as my early warning system.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Rosemary. I mean, you know, it's really just so great to see a face and connect a real person with who's managing our water supply, and a chance to, you know, it's kind of an advantage to Zoom format. We can actually see everybody's face in a way here. And the only people are never shy about asking questions, and you did a great job with the answers.
Well, thank you. And I really would like to encourage people in your group, if you're interested in this, please tune into what's going on with the Water Commission. You can find their links on our website or on the city's website under advisory bodies. we've got a lot of really interesting work going on, and there, we try to really engage that group. We have opportunities for public comment and questions that we would really encourage folks in your group to engage, because it's a really important issue for our community. For, the problem we have is long-standing. It's not brand new. It's not about growth. It really is about an inadequate piece of our infrastructure, Loch Lomond not being big enough to get us through the kinds of challenging drought situations we're dealing with. And it's really important for us to solve that for the, quality of life and the economic viability of our community. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Okay, so thank you, everybody. Remember, our next course is art history. That starts in the first week of May. And then on the 15th of May, the third Sunday, we will have our final general meeting of the year. And that'll be Greg Gilbert, who's a professor from environmental studies. That will be very interesting also. So thank you, everybody. All right, go to your interest.
Good job. Good job, Barry. Thank you.
Renew your memberships.
Thank you, Barry. Bye-bye.